seen it all. I've seen the greatest of men climb these dirty corporate walls, then, like a souffle, fall.
Hi, welcome to In Our Midst. I'm your host, Phil Rosner. The short clip that opened this podcast is from the multi-award-winning short film Office Song by Markou. Marcus is a British independent filmmaker, writer, and producer known for heartfelt, character-driven stories and for boldly self-distributing his own work. His debut feature, Papadopoulos Sons, which he wrote and directed, became an indie success story after he personally took it into UK cinemas, leading to deals with the BBC, Arte, and Netflix. He has since continued to champion truly independent filmmaking with projects like the aforementioned Office Song and his viral award-winning short Two Strangers Who Meet Five Times. His most recent micro-budget feature, The Wife and Her House Husband, is now available on Amazon Prime UK. Beyond his films, Marcus is widely respected for his innovative approach to self-distribution and his commitment to empowering other storytellers to take creative and financial control of their work. Please join me now for my in-depth interview with Markou. Well, hello, Marcus. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So, Marcus, could we please start with where you were born and what kind of stories and values surrounded you while you were growing up in your family, culture, and community, and how do you see those echoing in your work?
Well, I was born as the eldest son to a Greek Cypriot immigrant family in Birmingham in the United Kingdom, and Cyprus was part of the British Empire for many years. It was a colony. It achieved independence in 1955, but stayed as part of the Commonwealth, which is really allowed for the movement of a lot of Cypriots from Cyprus to the UK. And my father came over in 1962. And in that respect, I kind of aligned with American culture in a way from a very early age and connected to those immigrant stories that America was famous for, such as The Godfather, for example. And so even though I grew up in Britain, I really had this very acute understanding that I was the son of an immigrant that was trying to make it in the host country, the UK, which, as we know, is a global story now. This idea of moving your cultural roots with the emerging society that you want to succeed in. And I think that whole story influenced me, not just as a storyteller, but also the stories that I was attracted to growing up as a kid. That's the kind of general brushstroke answer to your question, which is, I was very acutely aware that I had a foot in two cultures, the Greek Cypriot culture, which is complicated in itself. It has its own culture, but it draws heavily on Greek culture. But it's also Middle Eastern Cypriot. The language is Greek, but it's a different dialect in a way. And then at the same time, I was in British culture. I had a foot in two worlds, a working class world where my father was an accountant to many sort of working class Greek Cypriots who were running fish and chip shops, which was the kind of predominant business for a lot of Greek Cypriot immigrants. Fish and chip shops, hair salons, those kind of cash businesses. So I had a foot in that world, but also I was privately educated at a British boarding school. So I had a foot in that world as well. So where I was playing rugby and, singing the national anthem and also, even though I was brought up Greek Orthodox, I was very, in the school, boarding school I went to was very Protestant. So I felt I had a foot in so many cultures that it could only have made me a storyteller, I think. Because when you grow up in that diverse world, you are trying to make sense of what your identity is as culture is changing. And then you become a storyteller in a way to try and make sense of your own world and the world around you. And that is what's influenced all my stories.
I've noticed in the films of yours that I've seen that you often return to questions of dignity, belonging, and how we treat each other in everyday life. And when you look back on your youth and early adulthood, can you see where that concern for the human condition, human rights, and kind of the whole thing to do with justice kind of first took root?
No, I think that's very much embedded in my family, and it's the concept of human dignity. My father came from an extremely poor family in Cyprus. Even by Cypriot standards, my family were poor. There's a really well-known book by Lawrence Durrell called Bitter Lemons of Cyprus. Lawrence Durrell, very well-established writer. And an unknown work of his is Bitter Lemons of Cyprus. And in that book, he talks, and it was set in the 50s, really about British Empire coming to an end in Cyprus. And in that book, he describes working class and then a class beneath that working class, which would only be described as peasant class. I mean, it's the only way to describe it, because these were people that lived off the land and they weren't educated. They didn't even read or write their own language. My grandfather, so my father's father, who only died, he was a very old man, and he was 102 when he passed away, and he died just like in 2020, and he was born in 1918. So he was kind of as the World War I finished, and died only a few years ago. So his entire span of his life was sort of the birth of the modern world, and he didn't even read or write his own language, which was Greek. So my father came to this country with a lot of trauma and scars that arise from lack of worth, from poverty. Like, poverty can produce this overwhelming sense of shame. And that was in my family, the shame of poverty. So there was this drive to acquire sort of material success. But at the same time, there was this idea of dignity, because we were only one generation away from the shame of poverty. So my father, even though he was driven, and it's a kind of an American dream story, isn't it? That whole idea, right? That's why I always connect to the American culture in that way, is that, and why Papadopoulos Sons, when it was reviewed by a lot of American critics, said, this is the kind of movie Hollywood used to make back in the day. And I guess, for me, it was, where that sense of dignity came from was from my own family's experience of the shame of poverty. So when we would witness poverty in other people, or we would witness as a family a disadvantaged state of being, that was natural for us as a family to feel empathy and sympathy. And that is something that I always retained passionately, because, when I went to visit my father's village where he was born, and he showed me, it was a village in the Troodos Mountains. He had no electricity. They were all in one room. Now, that story is much rarer now, but that was my family story. 3 generations from there to established middle-class British in 3 generations. So I guess, to answer your question, that idea of humanity is rooted in an understanding that every human being and it's something my father brought us up to believe, deserves some form of dignity, because we were only 2 generations away from that world. It was something that was inherently sort of appreciated in my family, where we had come from. That was always a reminder of where we have come from, but also this idea in my stories is that you can always return there, like as quickly as you've escaped from there. And that was a story that I was always attracted to when I see it. The rise and fall, the spectacular rise and fall, which is kind of the themes that dominate Papadopoulos and Sons, because the Wheel of Fortune spins so quickly. The speed by which you can find yourself in a better position can also act against you, and the Wheel of Fortune can turn very quickly. And that was another thing, which was the Wheel of Fortune will turn against you in your life through growing old, ill health, or whether it's a loss of wealth, or broken relationships or marriages. It's like, it seems to be that all of us are on this wheel, that there's always going to be a turn in the wheel. That is part of your life. How does one surrender to it? So that was kind of philosophically how I was approaching not just Papadopoulos and Sons, but even the short film I made, Two Strangers You Meet Five Times, which was that kind of wheel, that karmic wheel. It's just going to turn. It's just going to keep turning.
Before you ever picked up a camera, were there experiences that sharpened your awareness of prejudice or exclusion? You know, moments where you thought either this isn't how people should be treated, or what is it within a person that they would treat others in such a hateful or disrespectful way?
Even as a child, I was always aware of that sense of injustice, even within the classroom, why the whole human game of survival and to belong, and part of that human egoistic game of survival and belonging can often mean the exclusion of others, or the putting down of others, or the segregation of others. That was something I was very much aware of. And I always thought, well, I always thought I would be a champion somewhere in my life. I always thought that. And I do a lot of mentoring of young people, and I do a lot of work that's, not something that anyone would know, but I do mentor young people. I've done a lot of work with charities that support disadvantaged people, especially disadvantaged young people. And I'm always in my own business and in my own life trying to give people breaks. I just assumed every human being felt the same way, that everyone is acutely aware that we are all equal. I always assumed that was what everyone believed. And I believe that as children, that is what we all believe as children. And then something happens as you grow older I look at the way people respond to Two Strangers Who Meet Five Times, which is 4 million views on YouTube. And I look at all the comments and I think, oh yeah, maybe that is our natural state, because everything proves that film proves, and the response to that film proves, that we are all equals. We all, as human beings, that actually the lens that which we look at each other's lives is an egoistic lens, that is a form of social conditioning that says, well, you're better, you're more valuable, you're less valuable. I believe that all human life is valuable, equally valuable. It's as a human experience. Every human experience has value. It's only the social conditioning and the lens of social conditioning that says that these human beings are more valuable than those human beings for these reasons.
So I think that kind of leads into the next question, which is, was there a point where you realized that film specifically could be a way to cultivate empathy in your audience? Basically, inviting your audience to inhabit another person's pain or resilience, even for just a few minutes.
I think I always wanted to be a writer. That was something that I wanted to do. I never, ever imagined I'd ever make films, ever. But I was film literate. We were one of the first families in Birmingham in 1979 to get a Panasonic VHS video recorder. They were like massive, huge, heavy things, and the cassette deck was very industrial. And my mother was a film buff. She was a film fan. So I didn't know that what she was recording was cinematic classics, but she recorded, we had on video back then, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, Some Like It Hot, What's Up Doc, which is such a wonderful comedy, Barbara Streisand, Ryan O'Neill, and so these are like 1930s movies, like Captain Blood
Yeah.
with Errol Flynn. I grew up rinsing those films because TV in the 1970s in Britain didn't exist. It was 2 channels. They started for kids programming started quite late, and if you're up at like 6 in the morning on a Saturday, I would put straight away. I'd just put it on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. All the Eastwood movies were recorded. Fistful of
Yeah.
Dollars, A Few Dollars More. So all the Sergio Leone movies, I kind of didn't know that they were classics, but I kind of watched them religiously. So I was film literate in that way, and I was the actor at school. I loved acting, but I never imagined I'd make movies. I always thought I would be a writer, like in a newspaper. I'd have a column. I'd be like Glenn Greenwald. I'd be that kind of guy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's what I thought I would be. So I just thought that was the limit. That was the absolute goal for me as a young person. And then I thought, well, maybe I can write dramas for the stage. But I found that, quite difficult. And it was only very late in life, through a series of circumstances where I'd been to drama school. I couldn't pursue a career as an actor because a family business took off. So then I started improvising on stage. And then my writing aspirations, quite late, in my late 20s, went into theatre. And I thought, well, maybe I can write for the stage, because I've done a lot of improv on stage, because I couldn't act for a career because I was running a family business. And I was running it with my brother, and it was expanding. We'd raised money in the first .com boom. And, it's a successful business to this day, which really finances a lot of my projects. So I went and joined a very, what we call long form improv theatre company, and very different to the American improv tradition, like Second City, Chicago, which was comedy, short, funny, all the kind of Saturday Night Live kind of stuff, and all those amazing actors that came through that tradition, Bill Murray and John Candy and Alan Alda. I mean, there's just an incredible fascination for me to see how American improv drove so much of Hollywood and storytelling. But here in the UK, we were doing long form 40-minute dramas that were structured in a way in 3 acts, 40 minutes, that were quite serious. Again, with no script, some preparation, some planning. And I did that whilst running a business to stay creatively sane. And it was that made me think, well, actually, this is how writing works. Writing is a form of improvisation, and you're always trying to surprise yourself. I came to writing drama late, but I was always writing something. I was always writing a magazine column. When I was at university, I launched an entire magazine. I was at Birmingham University, and I couldn't get a writing gig on the university magazine. So I went, right, I'm going to launch my own rival magazine. I love the idea of publishing. So I guess, to answer your question, filmmaking came very late in my life, after I'd even done 2 years as a journalist, as a magazine journalist, straight out of university. And after all these things never worked for me, never established myself as a kind of brilliant journalist, never established myself as a great playwright. I suddenly found myself making movies and thinking, oh, well, I enjoy this. I'm quite good at this because I've trained as an actor. I'm a writer. I'm film literate. This film is a business, right? You've got to somehow pull together so many different departments, and I'm good at that. I'm good at making people excited about being on a film set. I'm very good at delegating, and everyone loves working for me on a film set. Everyone, actors love it, production designers love it, wardrobe loves it. They just love it because because I've run a business for 25 years and I know how to delegate and say, right, just do it. I'm giving you permission to be completely empowered. That's the only way you can make low budget movies work, like in that way. So I guess, to answer your question, a lot of these things came together quite late, all of these strands. And at 39, that's how old I was when I made Papadopoulos and Sons, which is really late, right, to make a movie, your first movie.
This is so interesting what you've just reflected on, because I see a lot of correlations with my own path. I mean, not to film per se, but I mean, I started a magazine in high school. Writing has been my penchant, since I was very young, and running them off on like a Stettner printer, and
But you see, in that day, magazine publishing was the cutting edge of media in the world. Like
yeah,
when you think of so many sort of magnets that were produced from that world, this was before the internet.
yeah,
Magazine publishing was really the channel by which you could influence society, galvanize coalitions, bring a message to the people. And it was very exciting. I imagine you would have had an amazing time as a young man doing that.
yeah. And I still love writing. I have not had the opportunity to see The Last Temptation of Chris yet.
That was my student movie.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about it?
So after I'd written 2 plays, and they seemed to find an audience, but the audience was TV film audience, not theatre audience. So I was probably a little ahead of my time, because now theatre really goes for that audience. And people said, look, Marcus, this isn't theatre. You're writing lots of short scenes. It's very cinematic. And in fact, for my first play, Age, Sex, Location, I had a number of film companies approach me saying, oh, this looks like a movie. And with my second play, Ordinary Dreams, the same thing happened, because it was like 25 scenes on stage, really short scenes, it's like almost like a movie on stage with quick changes of location, which is now the trend, right? But back then, I got a cold reception from theatre critics, but we found audiences. That was the frustrating thing. And one of the people that came to watch it was a really influential critic, TV critic, but also TV writer called Charlie Brooker, who did this series called Black Mirror here in the UK. But before that, he was a hilarious TV critic, and he loved my play. So it was a very strange thing. Like, the man that hates so much loved this play, even though I was getting like 0 stars again and 1 star from some sort of theatre critics. So somebody said, why don't you go to film school and try and make movies? And I was like, oh God, really? There's no way I can make a movie. It's technical. There's lights. There's wires. There's like at least with theatre, it's a stage, it's a script, it's actors, it's some lights. Go. You know what I mean? There was a real simplicity about theatre and accessibility. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to make a movie. No way. And I met this magical character called Wat Nickel, who's quite well-known Scottish man. He's a real magician. Actually, still alive. He's in his 90s. He's one of those mercurial characters that had done everything in his life. He'd been a speedway driver. He'd become, in the 70s, one of the first motivational speakers in America. He had lived with Billy Connolly for many years.
Okay.
And he had this kind of, he was a magician in the truest sense of the word. Like, you meet him and your life changes, that sort of thing. And I really got on with him. And I got him in actually to do a motivational session for my company. And that's when we became friends. And that's when he found out about my playwriting. He'd been a writer too. And he's got he's one of those people that had all crazy stories. And he was the guy that said, Marcus, go make movies. I said, what? How do I go make movies? He goes, well, go to film school. I'm sure. So I went, oh. So I had that conversation with him on the phone on the Monday. On the Wednesday, I went to Met Film School to look around, which was they did a part-time course every Wednesday night and every weekend for 6 months. So every Wednesday from 5 till 10 in the evenings, and then Saturdays the whole day, right? For 6 months. And as part of that, you finished making a short film. And so I loved the course. And at first I was like, I don't want to be a director. I'm a writer, I'm a producer, but I don't want to be directing. And it was they pushed me on the course. No, you should direct, Marcus. You're very good with actors. You've been an actor. You know how to talk to actors. So I thought, right, I will direct this thing. And if I like it, Great. If I don't, at least I've said I've done it once, and that's that. And that's The Last Temptation of Chris. And so effectively, it was my student movie. But what it was really, I took the Casablanca storyline and just made it as a short film. So he's a therapist. His realm, like Bogart's realm, is this kind of boundaried world that he lives in as a therapist. And in walks his ex-girlfriend with her partner looking for therapy. And instead of admitting that they know each other, he gives them marriage guidance, but then starts having an affair with her, which is the Casablanca kind of storyline. Right? Just rewritten for a short. And then he faces that moral dilemma of, what do I do? Do I reconnect with her, or do I do the right thing? Do I choose duty over my selfish desires? And of course he chooses the selfless sort of option and brings them together.
Okay.
And then finishes the relationship with her. And so that was the he was called Chris. This is The Last Temptation of Chris, right? It was really just a student movie, but it galvanized so many things for me as a filmmaker. And weirdly, the guy, the DOP on that film was James Friend, who ended up winning the Oscar for All Quiet on the Western Front. And he then shot Papadopoulos Sons as well. So there were so many like lovely synchronicities. And it was one of those where we're shooting in the middle of February and there's some snow predicted for the day we're shooting out on this pier. And the moment we turned the cameras on, the clouds broke, the sun shone, we called cut, the clouds came in, and everyone was going, I've never seen that before, Marcus. And of course, I've never made a film before, but everyone's saying, Marcus, you've got something going here. You've got to do this again. Because I was like, I'm not sure whether I want to do this again. And once I'd done it, a lot of the actors like took me aside and said, Marcus, you really have to do this again, because you're just doing something so nice and friendly and open. And I don't know any other way of being, but every time I meet crew and actors, all I would hear are their war stories of how awful filmmaking was.
Oh, really? Oh, dear.
There are all these awful stories of, and I was constantly being told that I am doing something that's fun and interesting and a bit lighter. That was The Last Temptation of Chris. That was this. Like, it was kind of the catalyst for me to go, oh, okay, right. Well, forget plays, forget writing in newspapers. Wow. Okay, this is cool. Like, people like me. They like what I'm doing.
It's amazing that, as you say, when you're doing something and you're really engaged in it and it's really working, all the synchronicities seem to line up. I've seen the same thing happen with my music since I was a teenager. It's really wonderful when that happens, because it's like, wow.
I think it's the world saying, go for it. This is what you're meant to be doing. Because I really wanted to be an actor, but the doors just shut for me. Like, they just slam in my face. I went to Lambda, like, in my 20s, and I really wanted to be an actor, but I wasn't getting any of those synchronicities at all. Like, when you hear people landing their first job and then meeting the right director or producer, and none of that happened. But I'm glad in a way, because I love where I am now. I do think filmmaking is a mature person's game. I actually don't think you should be making films before you're 40, because making a movie is like authoring a book, I guess. It requires you to have loved, lost, lived, failed, succeeded. You've got to have gone through all those life experiences, and you've got to have almost a level of maturity to know how to handle so many different types of people on a movie set. And that requires maturity. It requires experience. So when you hear all these nightmare stories of talented filmmakers just leaving a trail of devastation, it's because they lack, I suspect, what experience gives you, a sense of maturity. So I'm glad in a way that the acting didn't work out, because I'm making a movie this summer, which it will be the biggest budget movie I've made to this day. And I feel in my 50s, okay, I'm ready for this. Like, there's no way I could have made this movie at 40. Certainly not at 35. Like, it requires a level of maturity. And it's in every aspect. So, I'm looking at casting now, where I'm looking at self-tapes for one role. But I will see in the self-tapes that have been sent to me the potential for one of these people that might not be right for this role to then go back to the casting director and say, get this person to send me a self-tape for this other role. And that level of just exploring all the possibilities, negotiating correctly to get the best deal from locations, etc., not panicking, not obsessing about one's vision and making it all about me, but actually making it all about everyone that's coming to this film, whether they're actors or... So one actor didn't particularly want to meet me, was interested in the job potentially, a bit of a name, but I insisted we meet for a coffee. And it started off a bit cold, the meeting, I won't lie. But by the end of it, he didn't want to leave, and it was like, I think I'm excited that I'm at this position in my life where all my skills and experience can be put into something that ultimately empowers this gigantic group of people with so diverse range of skills. And that excites me, especially when you're empowering young people as well. So the producer, it will be her first feature film. Some actors, it will be their first lead. The two kids, it's called Two Kids, the movie. It's about two teenagers. It's almost impossible to finance because there's no stars. You can't have a star in the lead role. So I'm giving them a huge break. But around them, there's lots of young people that I'm giving first breaks to. That is so wonderfully important to me, not about me. I know the director is all about the director, but I've got to the point in my life, and you know this from your meditation, that it's never really about me. It's about the others that ultimately become a reflection of you in a way.
From my perspective, it goes a bit beyond maturity. I mean, I understand exactly where you're coming from by saying that, but if a person doesn't have an innate sense of connection through compassion and empathy, I mean, Trump's mature, right? But it's a different scene, totally. But
I do think about this all the time, how a man like that gets to that position of power. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's something, we're all reflecting on it. I hear what you're saying. I guess it's about gratitude, right? Like when you get to a point in your life where you're very happy with what you have. This idea of counting your blessings is like a daily routine for me in my life. I was happy never to make another film. After I made this last film, The Wife and Her House Husband, I thought I'm going to hang my boots up now. I'm satisfied. And I'll get on with the serious business of being grateful for my health at my age, grateful for the life that I have, finding balance and peace. But this film, I've been working on this film since 2019. Every time it died, it came back to life again. And it came back to life 2 or 3 times, even within the last 5 years. And last year I was going to shoot it and it all collapsed at the last minute. And I was like, okay, it's gone. But then it just resurrected again. And now we've caught the right wave and it feels good. And I guess, the bigger lesson in that is timing, isn't it? It's like sometimes you have to surrender. And this is what I imagine you get from meditation, certainly what I get from meditation and what most people get from meditation is that idea of surrendering to that moment.
Yeah.
Like when you surrender to the moment, there is no future. There is no past. There is only that moment. And if you build on that daily, so even if you're going about your business and you're stuck in a traffic jam, or this hasn't happened, or that hasn't happened, it's building that resilience that can only come from a practice that allows you just to surrender to that moment.
It's like one of my teachers said, it's about not getting bent out of shape when things don't go the way you want them to.
That's absolutely right. And not only that, it's like, can you even lean into the disappointment and live the disappointment, not fear the disappointment, allow the disappointment, because that's the only way you can let go of the disappointment And then life opens up again. Like the doors open up, the opportunities open up. And it might not be in the area that you were thinking. It might be something else. And that's freedom, right? That is like, I'm always asking, what is freedom? It's that sense of not being attached to an outcome.
What we're talking about here leads into, from my perspective, Papadopoulos and Sons, the storyline, right? And it really is a wonderfully engaging movie. I mean, it's
Thank you.
yeah, and I understand from a promotional perspective that you kind of really took the bull by the horns, as it were, and did a brilliant job of promoting it, and subsequently getting picked up by Netflix, which I understand is not really easy to do.
I was so naive, really didn't know.
Mm.
Like now I'm working with a producer that's talking to sales agents who are interested in this movie that I'm making this summer. Like we're already lining up a distribution strategy because I'm working with a really engaged producer that knows what she's doing, and she's lovely. But when I made Papadopoulos Sons, I was the producer. I was the writer. I was the director. I was the financier, and I was the distributor. So I was completely naive. I didn't know what on earth I was doing, but I had to improvise all the steps. And in my improvisation, I found a way to distribute that film. So I self-distributed it, and it became a test, like a case study for self-distribution and an inspiration for other independent filmmakers who maybe have got to the end of the road and didn't know what to do with it. This is why I'm enjoying where I am now in a much more mature way. I don't want to go down that road again. It's really stressful, but I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to find a way. And it was the way the film wanted to go. Like we live in a world now where we talk about energy. Like it's a thing. Like energy is a thing. Like we understand what that is. Everything has energy. And I do think I really get a sense of this with films that you make. They have their own energy. Like they have their own distinct energetic imprint. And Papadopoulos and Sons had its own energy. It did its own thing. It was doing things I didn't want it to do. I love the traditional independent film model where you would go to the Sundance movie festival, and you get 3 or 4 buyers for your independent film arguing over the price of your movie, and a deal would be done. And that was my dream. My dream was I'd be in Sundance with moon boots, meeting Robert Redford, and selling my movie, right? That was the dream I was aiming for. But Papadopoulos Sons had its own. It just said, I'm not doing that. And it was like I was on the ride that film wanted to go on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I weirdly found ourselves, right? This was crazy. This was insane. When we were like scrabbling around for distribution, and we'd made this film, and I was going to the Cannes Film Festival, The Market, and I was desperate to get it into the Toronto Film Festival. And the guy that could have got us into the Toronto Film Festival was a Greek guy that looked after the Balkans films. So Romania, Turkey, Greece, Albania, Bulgaria. And he said, look, Marcus, this is a kind of British film. I can't get you in there, but I can put you in the Thessalonica Film Festival because it's got George Korofas, a big Greek-French actor who plays Uncle Spiros. He's a really well-known French-Greek actor. He's done a couple of Hollywood movies. He made a movie with John Carpenter, Escape from LA, and he was the bad guy in that. And he's a fine actor and is a lovely man. So we went that way. We went to Thessalonica. It wasn't what I wanted to go to Toronto. This goes to Thessalonica. And then George said, someone at the European Parliament loves the idea of your film, and they want to screen it at the EU. And then it became a tussle between the left-wing parties and the right-wing parties championing who was going to present this film. And in the end, we screened it in the European Parliament, actually in the debating chamber, which was a first. No film had ever been screened there before. The EU Minister for Culture stood up, and in front of all the assembled European bureaucrats and politicians said, we can all learn something from this film. I was, what is going on? And the film was screened in front of all these decision makers. And on the floor below, at exactly the same time, Greece was negotiating its bailout. And I was presenting a film about Greeks losing their wealth and having to get a loan. And a lot of the press were saying, what is this synchronicity going on?
Yeah. That's wild.
But, it's like what I wanted was the Sundance Film Festival. What the film wanted, it wanted to go to the European Parliament and screen itself at the same time as Greece was negotiating its bailout. So you're never really this. You're never in control, are you, of the car, of the steering wheel? There's some other force driving it, and you're just sitting in the passenger, operating one of those toy steering wheels, and you think you're driving, but it's not connected to anything. It's just a toy steering wheel. And I feel sometimes that happens with movies, happens with life, but with movies, they have this energy. And I love listening to a lot of the director talks when they talk about movies. Coppola does a brilliant one on The Godfather. It's brilliant. And it just goes to show you that synchronicity and timing and luck and all these things often come to play in the making of a movie.
Can we move on to Two Strangers?
Yes.
Yeah, Two Strangers is one of my all-time favorite short films because of its unique story structure and its reflection on heartfelt compassion. What was the first kind of spark, the story or real life moment that made you want to embark on that storyline that takes one from this kind of creepy prejudice to a state of empathy?
I wanted to make a short film because the film I'm making now was something I've been planning back then.
Oh.
It wasn't happening. And I wanted to get back into doing something. And Papadopoulos now was receding into the past. And I felt like I was going to be left on the sides, not having anything else to do. So I thought, well, let me make a short film. And I was quite strategic. I thought, I want to tell a humane story. And I was scrabbling around for stories. In my day job, I run a business with my brother. I run an internet business, which really finances a lot of my projects. My colleagues, who's black, walked into the office completely distressed and shaken. And he's a Zimbabwean, but moved to the UK in his 20s. And he's the loveliest man, Bruce. I said, Bruce, what's wrong? And he said, I've just been severely racially abused outside a tube station. And I'm shocked. And it was very severe abuse for nothing. He was just in front of a woman and he was moving a little too slowly and she just destroyed him with one brutal, dismissive comment, which he'd never experienced before in that way. So I said to him, God, imagine if she's on her way to an interview and you're the guy interviewing her. I mean, I was like, God, do people not know what's around the corner? Karma, can be brutal. And we talked and I said to Bruce, actually, it's just a shorthand way of people empowering themselves using social conditioning as a kind of shortcut. Like, it's just really, apart from being wrong on so many fronts, what that woman was really doing in that moment was using a shortcut to completely disempower you, using the social conditioning of our times. And at some level, you have to find a way of valuing yourself more than valuing what she is doing. That was a separate conversation that became a very interesting conversation about value and self-worth. And he's a lovely man. But then I went home and said to my wife, oh my God, this happened. And the storyteller in me, what would happen if this woman had to now be interviewed by Bruce? And I thought, okay, this is my short story. So I wrote down those two scenes, which were scenes in Two Strangers. And I said to Victoria, my wife came in with a cup of tea. And I said, I got this short film. She said, what is it? I said, well, this man, and I toned down the racial abuse. And because I didn't want it to become that. I just toned it down. I made him Arabic. And it was at the time of ISIS. And it was this huge anti-Muslim backlash in the UK. And it was Brexit as well. So anyone that was slightly foreign looking everyone would joke, even to Cypriots running fish and chip shops, When are you going back? They'd never heard that in 30 years. So I thought, okay, well, this now makes it more Brexit specific to the UK, right? And my wife said, is that it? I said, what do you mean, is that it? So, I had two scenes, the incident and then the interview. My wife said, well, is that it? And put the tea on the table and walked out. And I went, oh, she's got a point. That's like, okay. And then I thought, well, what if they meet a third time? Oh, that's interesting. And he's fallen down on his luck. What if they meet again a fourth time? What if they'd already met as kids? Oh, and then I was like, got it. I got the 5 times. But I have to tell you, I didn't think it would work. When I wrote it, I went, these jumps in time are too huge for a 12-minute film. There's no way this is going to work. And I didn't think it would work. There was a part of me that was like, these leaps are too big. And when I saw the first cut on TV, I cried. I was like, oh my God, it works. I was like really pouring with tears because I thought, oh, it works much better than I thought it ever could, actually. I was like, oh my God, I was really surprised. And I was very lucky. Pauline, the editor, moved one of the times, and that was the right move. Editor called it. So it starts off 2, 3, 4, 1, 5. Yeah, and I think my original screenplay was the 1 came a bit earlier, weirdly, and she said that doesn't work. And so he made that shift and it worked. And the other thing, I did have a line for Samir at the very end. The old man is a really lovely Cypriot actor called Dimitri Andreas. He's been around 40, 50 years in business. I had a line for him, something along the lines, thank you. And he said, I'm going to cut that line. I'm just going to smile and tear up. And I was like, go for it, Dimitri. I don't know any actor that would cut his one line, but he did. And he was bang on right. So, you're navigating as well the talent and the ideas that other people are throwing into the pot. And without Dimitri cutting that line and just leaving it with a smile and teared up, and without Pauline moving one of those times around to make it 2, 3, 4, 1, 5, then it wouldn't have had the impact that that film had. And, it's still going viral and I still get comments every day. And, I'm like, it's beyond a dream, right? I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to have impact as a writer. And as a kid, there was these short stories that I absolutely loved, like The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. And there was a short story called The Snow Goose by Paul Gallico, which was about, like in World War II with the saving of soldiers from Dunkirk. These books really, really affected me as a teenager, and especially The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. And I did say to myself, God, if I could write a short story like that had that kind of impact, that emotional impact on the human heart as those stories both did. And I remember thinking that as a 16-year-old, I'd be really happy. And in a way, Two Strangers is kind of doing that. It's being played at schools around the world. I get requests all the time from schools saying, can we have permission? I go, of course you can have permission. And I say, what's the fee? There is no fee. And people say, have you monetized it? I went, absolutely not monetized it. I don't want a single penny from this film. It cost me $25,000. And honestly, it's probably the best £25,000 I've ever spent in one go, because it just keeps going. And I feel so grateful that I was lucky enough to find that story.
Can we talk a little bit about Office Song? The way you conveyed the inner dialogue from each character is so interesting. How did you come up with that?
Well, again, I was limited by budget. I only had about £15,000, and therefore that was my office that I run the day job in, my business. So I thought, well, one of the 2 most expensive costs in filmmaking are talent. Well, let's talk about variable costs. Talent, that's actors, is variable. You can get an actor for £250 a day. You can get an actor for free if they want a credit. And you can get an actor for £1 million a day if you really want to go to the very top. If you've got £1 million, you can get probably any actor on the planet for a day, right? So that's one variable cost. The other variable cost is locations. Again, you can get a location for free because someone goes, yeah, take my building, it's fine, I'm not using it. Or you can get people going, I want 5, 10, 20,000 pounds a day for my location. I had to write a story about an office, set in an office. So I just thought, well, okay, let's do the office romance story. And then I wanted to do something different. And I was originally going to do a one shot. That was the original plan, or what they call in the business a oneer, where the camera never breaks. So we follow the story all the way around. And then I was like, oh, I'm not sure that works. I was looking for something different and experimental. And then I thought, well, what about this idea of direct address to the camera and accessing the inner monologue and then making that poetry, which in a way, it acts like a song in a musical, where in a musical, there's drama that's conventional. There's two characters talking. And then at some point, a character breaks from that, goes out to the audience and starts singing a song, revealing his or her or their inner emotional state directly to the audience. So I thought, well, why don't I do that with poetry? And I thought, oh God, that's really interesting. And it was a lot of fun to do. And we played with this, where we've got this lens called a cinefade that fades out the background when a character's talking directly. And then I've just found this almost conventional office romance story that we've seen 100 times and experienced 100 times. And then I thought, well, what's interesting about this is the direct address and the poetry. And I thought, oh, golly, one day I'd love to make an entire film like this where we do direct address, because you break the fourth wall, you do the inner state, you do it in poetry, which is fun anyway. It's kind of what happens in Shakespeare, isn't it? That idea of a character suddenly turning to the audience and doing a monologue in poetry, and happens in musicals. It goes back to my love of theatre and breaking that fourth wall, talking directly to the audience and looking down the lens of the camera, I thought was something that was a lot of fun. And I have to say, for £15,000 and one weekend, right? It was like really, but it came just before the pandemic. So I never got to go to any festivals because everything was pandemic. And it was a real shame. I would love to come back to that idea and do an entire movie like that of direct address, where the actor just stares down of the lens and just delivers, these inner monologues of either rage or, like, in one character, she's just raging, but on the surface, she's kind of like serene. I loved that. I had a lot of fun making that. And I had a lot of fun with the responses as well. And weirdly, that film did really great festivals. It got to some Oscar nominatable festivals, like really high profile festivals. I think because it was experimental like that. And it won lots of lovely awards. But the most interesting thing about that, and actually talking to you now, is reawakened. I've not spoken about this in years, but wow, I completely forgotten that I thought I'd make a feature film like this until speaking to you now. I'm going to put that on the list. So yeah, it was fun and experimental, and it was just like looking at the form, looking at language, looking at this kind of slightly larger than life performance, breaking the fourth wall. I'm not sure I've seen anything like that actually before or since.
Yeah, it's very unique. With regards to the wife and her house husband,
Yes.
the film spends a lot of time in kind of periods of silence, hesitation, and kind of the tiny negotiations from a long relationship. How intentional was that as a way of showing the inner lives and I guess even kind of the mental health of both characters?
That was deliberate because, again, I was guided by budget. I had 230 £200,000 or so, which was going to anchor the film I'm making this summer. But this was 6 years ago. The pandemic came along, everything crashed. I had £200,000 that was going to anchor a 1.5 million movie. And I never imagined in my life I'd make a movie for 200,000. I thought, oh golly, that's good. The micro budget. I've got friends that will be screaming at me when I say this because they make films for 30, 40,000. But I always point out to them, in doing so, they leave behind a trail of devastation and broken relationships. When you're making films at that level, you are effectively getting people to give their life and soul for nothing often. And I don't want to go down that road. I've got friends that are philosophically aligned to that way of making films. And they see me as some kind of rabid capitalist that's making films. And I say to them, but I'm still making them for a lot less than the raging capitalists in Hollywood are making them for. I'm still making them for pennies. So I had this budget of 200. And I had a friend that was doing an improvised breakup story that was really interesting. And then I thought, oh, why don't I just improvise a breakup story? I'll get 3-4 cameras. I'll give her a credit on the idea. It would be completely different. I'd get 5 days. I'd get 2 actors. I'd run around London and I'd improvise a breakup story. And I thought, and I can shoot this really coolly. So as I was structuring the story, I suddenly went, well, hang on a minute. I was finding myself gravitating to structure. So it was like, well, I've got this amazing scene where they dance in an old music hall. And I've got this scene where they're on the gondola going over London. And I've got this scene where they're walking along and I started, as I was writing this, I was like, well, what brings them together? Oh, a letter. So I came up with this idea of a letter and a list. Now, in story structure, the list is like the hidden secret weapon for a lot of writers. Because if a character's doing a list thing, you can say, well, I walked out the tube, I turned left, I walked past the cafe, which I normally go for a coffee on a Wednesday. Then I crossed the road and saw a policeman who was asking me for directions. In other words, just the very sense of a list gives any scene momentum and it gives it narrative drive. But that's always in the back pocket of a lot of writers, the list. You can always go back to a list, like to get yourself out of trouble or to create some kind of momentum. But what if the list was the story? Like a letter that has had a list of things to do. And the couple was saying, well, we're going to break up, but before break up, let's do our list that we wrote 20 years ago. Now that structurally probably deserves more credit than it got, because what you're able to do with that is take 2 actors and create a story. And it's almost impossible to create a story with just 2 actors in one room. So what the list does, it becomes the narrative drive to keep pushing these 2 characters into new situations. Honestly, most films with just 2 actors, 2 characters, are impossible to entertain an audience. Like, it's just impossible. So I don't think I get enough credit for the list at the beginning. And I had a friend who sadly passed away called John Burgess. John was a dramaturg who basically used to help playwrights develop their ideas. And he set up the studio at the National Theatre and brought over Angels in America and discovered some incredible plays and was a real, like, legend. And he came and saw The Wife and Her House Husband and he loved it. And he said, oh my God, Marcus, your list idea is brilliant. And that was all constrained by economics. I was like, I've got 200,000. I literally can't afford 3 or 4 actors. I can only afford 2 actors and these locations and a crew for 2 weeks. So that whole letter drove the story. And then I had to find interesting and diverse situations to put this couple in. And then underneath that is the reveal of the traumas. Because I thought, well, right at the beginning, when I got my list idea, I said, what am I really exploring? I'm exploring grief. I'm exploring trauma. I'm exploring addiction as related to trauma. All those things, which I've found utterly fascinating and interesting. I'm not a recovering alcoholic. I've never been to an AA meeting, but a lot of people in my life are recovering alcoholics or in our NA. I have found these people, they're some of my best friends are, so I've never even been to an AA meeting. So I loved writing that scene with the AA meeting, and I shopped it around to some of my friends who are in AA and they loved it. So for me, I was honoring so many things that I felt. I knew it wasn't a commercial film. I knew it wasn't going to do anything beyond it being its own work of art. And I was happy with that because it's a very bleak film. It's not a film I'd want to watch, but this is the film I made, right? Like if someone said to me, do you want to go watch this film about a couple breaking up and she's a recovering alcoholic and they're grieving over their dead child? I'd be like, no, I absolutely do not want to watch that movie. But I felt like impelled to make it. And what it did for me nicely was it was the other end of the spectrum of Papadopoulos and Sons, where Papadopoulos and Sons is an exploration of joy. I found a way to explore grief. And to be honest, even though some of the aspects of that story were a million of miles away from my life, I felt that I was exploring these themes that at some level were about trauma, you know, the effect of trauma on human relationships. So that was it, really. Again, it all started with budget.
I love the scene where they're in the park together. And I don't remember what their names were in the film, but Lawrence, the actor, gets up and he goes just around the corner. And then they start a conversation on their phones. I thought, man, that's a very cool kind of thing.
That was a creative challenge as well. Like when we see text on screen, it's always very quick. We never see an entire 6-7 minutes of it. So I had to find a way of doing it without putting text on the screen. So yeah, you're right. I thought that was quite innovative as well. Like finding that solution was quite interesting. Again, it was quite experimental.
But the other thing was, and excuse my ignorance, this is kind of a technical question, where you've got like very long shots of them sitting on the bench in the park, but the audio is very clear. How do you do that?
Well, what you're doing is you're taking the audio recording from a closer version of the film. So when we shoot them in a tighter shot, the microphones are like, imagine this is the microphone here, that it's out of shot there. Okay. And we're lifting that audio, and then with the wider shot, we're dropping that audio in and syncing it to their mouths because their mouths are so tiny and so far away. You'll never know. That's how you do it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. We're getting close to the end of my questions here. Marcus, I read that you were working on a film called Ali's English. Is that correct?
That's it. It's now called Two Kids.
It's called Two Kids now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's Casey and Ali, right? Okay. Can you? I think you've already shared a little bit about it, but
I'll give you a quick summary. It's kind of thematically similar to Two Strangers. It's the kind of thematic feature version of that story. Ali is a Syrian refugee who is being bullied mercilessly by his racist nemesis in his class. They're both like 16. One of these incidents is recorded on a video and it goes viral, and then the tables turn, and now Casey is receiving the threats because it's now become a national story. The entire story becomes a court case and political, and Casey's uncle is a famous right-winger within the story, which is now an archetype, isn't it, that in our society, whether it's Trump or Nigel Farage or Tommy Robinson. They're using a message that's quite emotive, that makes sense to a lot of people, but ultimately not to benefit those people, right? That seems to be my read of what's going on. And it becomes a court case, but Ali refuses to speak. They become friends, and it's really the impact their friendship has on this kind of society around them. And there's a few twists and turns in the story. And really, it's what's exciting for me is I get to make a film where the two leads will be unknowns. And in a culture that is dominated by famous actors, the obsession to get the famous actor on the screen. For me, the freedom and joy of putting two teenage boys as the leads is because you can't finance that movie. The only way it's getting financed is me and my family. We're sole financiers of it. So it's a huge risk. Actually, my brother, Andrew, has jumped in with both feet and said, and he really surprised me. And I have to say, he's the most cynical of anyone I know about movies and movie investment. He did say, Marcus, you're due a hit. So me and my family are putting in the money to get this film made. It's still low budget, but it's still a lot of money. But I've got an amazing group of people, not least the kids, not least the actors. I've got some wonderful names surrounding the kids. I've got Stephen Delane jumping in to play a small part, a wonderful actor called Juliet Stevenson, who is going to jump in and play a small part, Max Beasley, and a lovely Irish actress called Genevieve O'Reilly, who will play the mother of the kid. And she was in Andor, Mon Montfort. I mean, it meant a lot to me because I don't watch much TV, but I loved Andor, the Star Wars series. I thought it was an incredible work of art and politics and storytelling. And so I was really excited to reach out to Genevieve, and I was really excited to meet her, and I was really excited that she was going to jump in because we're not offering much money to these actors. They're coming to it for the story. I'm in the middle of pre-prep now and rewriting the script and casting and trying to get all the elements together. But so far, touch wood, fingers crossed, it might happen this summer. Well, it is happening. The train has left the station, so it's going to happen. But you do worry, right? It's all about tone. How do you get the tone? Like the screenplay never gives you tone, and tone happens on set. And so you put down some rules, like when it's the exterior world, we're going to be handheld at the camera. But when we're on the interior world of the two kids, we put the camera very static, sticks, and we go for very classic framing. So it's setting those rules up front that you hope when you're in the edit, you capture the tone. You get the tone. That's the thing that keeps me up at night, like the tone of the story. You just don't know. Honestly, you don't know until you've put it in front of an audience whether you've got anything good or not.
Closing question. Marcus, across all your work, like from Papadopoulos and Sons, Strangers, and now Two Kids, what gives you hope about our capacity for empathy and change, even in this increasingly fractured world?
I believe in the human spirit. I see enough in this world to give me a lot of hope. The reason we're at this time of fracture is because the world is being reborn. I do believe in the capacity for humans to embrace our natural energetic state of love. I believe that. I see it, I experience it, I witness it. And I think part of those positive changes are actually reflected in the breakdown of the world. In other words, the breakdown of structures, the impulsive, often decisions to go to war, the horrific images that we see from around the world about how people are treating each other, the breakdown of controlling the message and the narrative, the idea that social media cannot be controlled in a way, like the things that depress us, which is the fracture that you just mentioned, are a natural result of humanity taking the big step forward to growing up. And I don't think you can have one without the other. You cannot have the rebirth without the pain. You need Trump. In a way, Trump becomes narcissistic, self-indulgent reflection that we need to reject. And that without Trump, we cannot see ourselves for what we are in the ugliest way. And without that, we can't grow up and go, that's something I don't want. So when you see the collapse of MAGA and you see all these incredible traditional MAGA politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, who have gone from a position where you would question so many things to suddenly become one of the champions to discredit Trump and MAGA. Or you see what's happened to someone like Thomas Massey, where he's just like been booted out, right? And we all see how and why that's happened because of corruption and vote rigging. And in other words, we see Trump destroy half the White House to build this obscene ballroom. Like all these bizarre decisions to take over Venezuela, or this endless game that he's playing with Iran, right? It's like all the things that might depress us when we look at our fractured world are the necessary elements that we need to see and reject in order for us to grow up as human beings. These are the times. Like, I wouldn't want them any other way. Yes, they're ugly. Yes, they're painful. Yes, they are frightening. They're all those things. But I think they are also the tools by which we grow up as a society, as a collective human race. Like, everyone wants peace. You know, I'm Greek Cypriot. I go to events in London where we come together as artists. They're organized by a friend of mine who runs a theatre in North London, where we come together from that region of the world. So you get Turks, Greeks, Cypriots, Palestinians, Jews, Lebanese, Muslims, Christians, atheists, and we're all from the Levant, right? And when you put us all together in one room, we're all artists, we're all storytellers. And it feels to me that the very tools that have kept us divided, the protocols, the narratives, the conditioning, the things that are deliberately installed to keep us fighting each other, those things are collapsing because people want peace. People want peace, you know. So even in these darker times, I'm supremely optimistic.
Yeah, I actually wrote a piece a while ago referring to Trump as the dark angel. And it's just basically what you're saying.
You can't have the light without the shadow. And I think what we're seeing in individual lives, I get a sense of this from people that I know, and on a collective, is that relationship with the shadow self. And it's interesting that you say dark angel, because it's the same idea that without that understanding of the shadow self that we all inhabit, and what that means collectively in terms of our political structures, in our aspirations as a civilization, right? Like, can't grow up as individuals or as a civilization until we've done the shadow work. You know, and that happens individually and it happens collectively.
Thank you so much for joining us, Marcus.
I've loved this conversation.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. The advice I would give, yes, do it. Because of technology, there are ways now of making your films with no budget, micro budget, low budget. But the most important advice I always give is try and tell a story that means something to you. Because if you tell the story that means something to you, there's a chance it may mean something to someone else as well. And that is ultimately how you find your audience. So don't try and second guess what the market wants. Follow your own passions. And what does one do to find a story that means something to oneself is really an inspection of oneself. In other words, it's ultimately about getting to know who you are. That journey ultimately will open up the stories that mean something to you. And those are the stories you should be trying to tell rather than what the market would dictate.